So I have a client that was a former high-level military officer, and I still remember him coming into my office. And he always scared me just a little bit because he was quite brusque. And he sat down in front of me and he said, "Tell me all the risks to my retirement." And so I started going into the normal spiel that I go into and explaining to him why he was going to retire fine and he had enough assets. And he looked me square in the eye again and he said, "Tell me all of the risks to my retirement." And then he began to explain to me that in his former life as a military officer, he never was worried if he knew what the risks were going into a situation. What scared him was not knowing what the potential risks were. And so I spent the next hour going over what are the risks that someone faces in retirement. So don't worry, I'm not going to spend an hour today going through all the risks that retirees face, but I do want to condense them and look at some of the top risks that retirees face and also give you some tools or some strategies to help you navigate around them. And just a fair warning, a lot of my advice or my strategies are going to fly in the face of conventional wisdom, especially around how much risk you should have in your investment portfolio. But first, my name's Kevin Lum. I'm a certified financial planner based in Los Angeles, and this channel is dedicated to helping 1 million people have the tools and the resources they need to retire without worry. So the first risk is actually expected expenses. There are expenses that you already know about, housing and food. But the problem that I see is that a lot of retirees don't have a realistic budget. So they know that they're going to have medical expenses, and they know they're going to have food and housing and gifts to grandkids and trips and all the other things that go on in just normal life, but they haven't properly budgeted. So the way to prepare for this and the kind of the strategy around this is just make sure you have a realistic budget. And then once you have that budget, maybe just add a little bit of fluff to it. So if you think you can live on $10,000 a month or $5,000 a month, add an extra $500 or an extra $1,000 to that budget, just to give yourself a little bit of buffer room in that budget for expected costs that end up costing a bit more than you'd planned on. Now, another risk that retirees face is inflation, which we are all well aware of post-COVID. Inflation basically means how much are we seeing the increase in the price of goods and services? Is the price of food increasing? The price of housing, medical care, how much are those increasing? The higher the rate of inflation. If you're on a fixed income like many retirees, there's a real risk that you're going to degrade your purchasing power over time. So just to get a sense of how quickly this can spiral out of control, you need to know the rule of 72. So the rule of 72 is basically how long does it take an investment to double. So if you have a portfolio that returns 5% a year, you can take 72 divided by 5, and that will tell you how long it will take for that portfolio to double. But you can also use the rule of 72 for inflation. So let's say you're a retiree and your monthly expenses are $5,000 a month. If you have 3% inflation, so take 72 and divide it by 3, it's going to take 24 years for those costs to double from $5,000 a month to $10,000 a month. On the other hand, if you have 4% inflation, it's going to take 18 years for that to double. If you have 5% inflation, it's only going to take 14 years for that to double, which means prices could double and then double again in your retirement years. You can see how as inflation begins to creep up, it can really impact your purchasing power. How do you protect against this? Well, the first is through having fixed income sources that have a cost of living adjustment. So for example, Social Security, many pension funds will have, fixed income, and then they'll have a cost of living adjustment pegged to the rate of inflation, which will help protect you from future inflation. The other way you can protect yourself is by investing your money. The problem is, I'm going to return to this theme a number of times during this video, is that as retirees age, and this is partly because they've been told to do this, they begin to move their money from more aggressive investments in the equity market and stocks, and they begin to move it towards bonds. Well, what happens is if they do that, they slow down their rate of growth, and therefore, if they are not increasing rapidly enough, you can lose your purchasing power. So with investments, you have both a nominal rate of return and the real rate of return. The nominal rate of return is the amount that the investment went up in value. So let's say over the past 30 years, you've had an investment that went up 3% per year, annualized over 30 years. So your nominal rate of return was 3%. That money increased annualized by 3% a year. But if you had inflation that was at 3% per year over that same period, then your real rate of return, the actual rate of return adjusted for inflation, is 0. And so your goal with your investments is to outpace the rate of inflation so you can protect your purchasing power. I keep this book by my desk. I'll show it to you here. Stocks for the Long Run by Jeremy Siegel. But what he does is he goes and looks at a research study that goes back all the way to 1802. And what he found out is that the annualized return of stocks, the real rate of return of stocks since 1802, has been 6.9%. The real rate of return of bonds during that same period has been 3.6%. And there have been long periods of time, sometimes 20, 30, 40 years, where the real rate of return on long-term government bonds has actually been negative. So they have gone up in value, but they're not moving up in value as fast as inflation. And one of the things that Siegel talks about is that over the long run, stocks are actually less risky than bonds, which is kind of shocking to a lot of retirees, because we've been told that as we move into retirement, that the less risky thing to do is to put our money in bonds. But when you look at a long-term perspective, we actually find that bonds can be quite risky. And so a lot of retirees, and don't go out and change your asset allocation based on this video, because there's a lot that goes into this, but a lot of retirees have been told to move a large amount of their money into bonds in retirement. But by doing so, they could actually be increasing their risk, or at least not reducing their risk, and also reducing their long-term legacy that they're able to leave to family members. Another risk is the longevity risk, is that you'll end up outliving your assets. And this is becoming an increasing risk as modern medicine continues to improve and life expectancy increases. Now, life expectancy recently decreased primarily because of COVID, but what you need to know is that the average life expectancy, whatever that number is, means that there is a large chunk of people who live much longer, and we are seeing a larger and larger percentage of people live into their 90s. Planning your retirement around average numbers is not a good retirement plan. You want to be protected if you are one of those people who passes the 100-year mark, and I think we're going to see more and more people begin living past age 100. And so longevity risk is a real concern for many retirees. And what's the strategy around longevity risk? It's the exact same strategy that you'll see around the inflation risk, is that too many retirees are going way too conservative with their investment portfolios, and they're increasing their longevity risk, and they're increasing their inflation risk as well. The next risk is the sequence of return risk. The most simple way to explain this is that the market goes down at exactly the wrong moment. So just as you're retiring, you enter a deep bear market, and you need to pull money out of your retirement portfolio, but the stock market is collapsing, and so you're forced to sell stocks at a discount to pay for your living expenses, which greatly reduces your long-term earning potential. So the strategy to get around the sequence of return risk, and this is what we use with many of our clients, is we actually have our clients keep a war chest. So the portfolio that we use for most clients, and it's a fairly aggressive equity-heavy portfolio, but the longest it's ever been negative or flat has been somewhere around 4 to 5 years. And so for our clients, we want them to have enough money in a war chest to withstand that downturn. So let me give you an example. Let's say we have a couple that needs $5,000 a month to live on. They have $3,500 a month coming in from Social Security. So they need to pull about $1,500 a month from their portfolio in order to meet their living expenses. So for them, we would have them create a war chest of $18,000 a year for 4 years. So we'll have them put that $72,000 in a money market fund or short-term treasury, someplace that's very safe and won't have market volatility. And so they have that war chest. So no matter what happens in the market, if they go through a prolonged downturn where the market is down for 3-4 straight years, they won't have to sell at fire sale prices. They're not going to have to sell when the market is 50% down, wiping out some of their long-term return. So there's some really easy ways that you can navigate around the sequence of return risk. So the next risk is unexpected expenses. Unexpected expenses are things like, your either air conditioning in your home breaks down, or your car stops working, or you have a really expensive repair, or you have a family member who's in need of some quick liquidity. And so my strategy around unexpected expenses is that in addition to your retirement savings, you should have an emergency fund. You have a certain amount of money set aside, a few months of living expenses possibly, that you can pull on if you have any unexpected expenses. So you're not putting a new air conditioner or hot water heater on your credit card, but you're just able to pay that money out of that emergency fund. The final risk is lower than expected market return. Right? We have seen this happen multiple times just in the past couple decades. We had the tech crash in the early 2000s, and then we had the great financial crash in 2007 and 2008. And then we had the COVID crash. And so we've been through these various periods where we have had lower than expected rates of return. And one of the best ways to protect against these lower expected rates of return is by having a diversified portfolio. So for example, if you had all your money invested in the S&P 500 between 2000 and 2009 or 2010, basically during that decade period, you would have returned about $0. The S&P was basically flat. You can go and run your own numbers if you don't believe me. So we had a 10-year period where the S&P 500 was flat. But if you'd had exposure to emerging markets, if you'd had exposure to small cap value and different asset classes, you would have had a positive return when the S&P 500 was flat. So one of the ways you can protect yourselves against this market downturn is by just having a diversified portfolio. And if you have a war chest plus a diversified portfolio, you can withstand a lot of market volatility and you can stand a lot of market drawdowns without having to panic and dip into your retirement funds. One of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they panic during down markets and they sell at the worst possible time, and they get greedy and they buy at the worst possible time, because markets are forward-looking mechanisms. They've already priced in whatever news that you've heard and read, they've already priced that in. So at the moment you're feeling the greatest fear and you're like, I want to sell everything, markets have already begun to look at the recovery that's just around the corner, and so the prices begin to go up. And then at that moment when you feel euphoric because everyone is making money in the market and you're like, it is time to get in, it's at that exact moment that the market tanks. We've seen it happen over and over again. And so the best strategy, the best investment plan is to do nothing, is to create a diversified portfolio, to assess how much risk you can take, to make sure you have your war chest. Now, there are going to be these bumps where they're going to go up and down, but that's why if you have your war chest and you have a plan, you'll be able to withstand it. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I know it was a bit more technical than some of the other videos, so thanks for sticking with me. If you like this content, if you would, click the like button, subscribe, ding that bell, leave a question in the comments below. And then I'm actually going to, at some point, try to make a video if there's any interest, so let me know in the comments below. If there's any interest in something that goes a bit more deeply into the history of market returns and nominal returns and real returns and bond markets and how bonds have performed against stocks and gold and all that. So if you're interested in that, leave a comment below. Thanks again for watching.